call to order the May 4th, 2021 meeting of the Santa Barbara City's Ordinance Committee. Ms. Perea, if you would call roll, please.
Okay. Councilmember Sneddon?
Here.
And Mayor Pro Tem Gutierrez?
Present.
Perfect. And Chair Jordan?
And here, it puts us all here.
All right.
So we'd like to move on to public comment for comments that are not part of today's agenda. Ms. Perea, I will let you canvass those that are in attendance to see if any are interested in commenting on items not on today's agenda.
Okay, we have one speaker raising their hand, and for anybody else, if you'd like to speak or join in the public comment portion for anything not on the agenda, you're welcome to click the hand icon and that'll let me know that you'd like to speak. Let's go ahead and begin with the first speaker. That's Anna Marie Gott. And Anna Marie Gott, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself. And hold on, let me go ahead and I just sent her an audio pin. It looks like she's calling in, so that might take just a second.
Okay, no
But
worries.
she's the only speaker, so. Anna Marie Gott, if you'd like to go ahead and enter your pin and unmute yourself. Chair Jordan, it doesn't look like she's able to unmute herself. And I don't have the ability to unmute her because she's on a phone.
Okay, why don't we move on, and if we have time at the end and she has something for public comment that's not on the agenda, we'll reopen that back up and give her an opportunity. So we'll move on to our first item today, and that is titled Hazard-Based Premium Pay for Grocery and Drug Retail Workers. Mr. Kalan, I bet you are out there ready to go.
Thank you, Chair Jordan, members of the Ordinance Committee. Today's presentation is a follow-up on the Council's direction of April 20th, 2021, relating to establishing a hazard-based premium pay for grocery and drug retail workers. Next slide, please. Today, we're recommending that the Ordinance Committee consider for introduction a proposed ordinance that does what 6 of the Council directed on April 20th. Next slide. So let's begin by talking about what this is, which legal box this ordinance would fit into. Under the California Constitution, the city has the police power, and unless it's constrained by state or federal government, that power enables you to establish minimum wages. Here, the labor code also reinforces the city's clear power to establish local minimum wages. So in thinking about this legally, we are in the category of creating a local minimum wage for certain classes of worker. Next slide, please. The basic rationale for doing it is that grocery and pharmacy workers have faced greater COVID-19 exposure than other workers. According to documents presented to the federal trial court in litigation challenging the city of Long Beach's hazard pay ordinance, even the grocery opponents acknowledge that grocery workers face at least a slightly elevated risk of mortality. Next slide. What are the legal standards a court would use to look at the council's choices in this ordinance? And when I say choices, I'm talking about the policy determinations you will make, such as which workers should this ordinance apply to, how much additional pay should be provided, for how long, all of those kinds of terms would be judged by a court. Here, because you're dealing with basic economic regulation, the courts should apply the rational basis standard. And that's a very low threshold for an elected body to meet. It simply means that we will have the burden of showing that there's at least one reasonably conceivable state of facts that warrants the decisions you make. Next slide. Let's talk about how that applies. So the basic requirement here for which you will need a rational basis is that specified workers are going to be getting 60 days of premium hazard-based pay of $5 an hour. The ordinance, as directed by the City Council, allows a 100% credit for that premium pay against against employers who are presently paying hazard pay. In other words, the credit does not have any look-back provision. And as a matter of factual research that we'll talk about, I did not find any other cities that had a look-back provision on credits either. Lastly, the council directed that the ordinance would apply really only to big companies, those with 300 workers or more nationally. You did not specify, the council did not specify a local requirement. So we picked 20 workers, and you will see how that plays out. So as an example, a grocery store chain with 300 workers nationally would be subject to the ordinance if they have at least 20 workers in Santa Barbara. Next slide, please. So here are these variables, these policy issues that the courts will judge with a rational basis. We talked about pay and for how long and which businesses, but which workers are we talking about? Many of the forms of ordinances addressed grocery and pharmacy workers as council directed. In addition, many of the ordinances also addressed what I would call big box retailers that don't dedicate 70% or more of their square footage to food sales. So the ordinance before you includes big box stores. Frankly, I don't believe we have any in Santa Barbara that meet that square footage threshold. Next slide, please. All right, this is hard to look at, so we're going to leave it up for a long time and work our way through it. The council included in its direction a request that we do a comparison to try and understand what other cities are doing in this area. The city administrator's office was able to pull together a list, and working since then and over the weekend, I'm able to present to you really the comparison factors. This should let you see where the highlighted yellow Santa Barbara proposal fits in relation to other cities. So let's start with the pay premium. The pay premiums that we found ranged from $3 to $5. $4 and $5 was fairly typical. The duration was as long as 4 months, although in one instance, Oakland, they set the duration to be tied to termination of the local health order. The proposal from the council on April 20th to have a 60-day duration is the same as San Francisco's and is relatively short. In this instance, I think that having a short duration is advantageous. I would otherwise ask the council to include another kind of terminating event, which would be conclusion of any emergency state as demonstrated by orders from the governor. So 300 nationally, 20 locally. The council gave zero direction on how big the workforce had to be locally. We picked 20 because it fell within the range. It was at the higher end of the range. The council may want to adjust that. Likewise, for grocery stores, we included a minimum size of 10,000 square feet. It's not essential that there be a minimum. This would still apply only to firms with 300 employees nationally and 20 locally. All retail pharmacies are included regardless of size, either nationally or locally. Now, in terms of credit, we found that the vast majority of the cities did offer a credit, but as I mentioned, not a look-back credit, a credit for companies that are currently paying hazard pay. And again, with one tiny exception, the credit was at 100% for all of the cities. So Santa Barbara's proposal coming from council of $5 an hour for 60 days in duration with a national size of 300 employees is well within the range of what other cities have done. Next slide, please. I would like to discuss process with the Ordinance Committee. As the Ordinance Committee is aware, the municipal code exempts emergency ordinances from the Ordinance Committee's jurisdiction. On the other hand, the Ordinance Committee has the power to table indefinitely ordinances with which it does not agree. Because of the council's direction last week, today we have in front of the Ordinance Committee the non-emergency ordinance. The emergency ordinance will appear on the council's 2 p.m. agenda, as will the non-emergency ordinance if the Ordinance Committee so recommends. The reason we're recommending 2 ordinances is pretty simple. To the extent that anyone is concerned about the emergency nature of the current situation, and I will say candidly, I am less concerned after having read the Long Beach litigation. Anyone concerned with the validity of an emergency ordinance would be discouraged from challenging that ordinance if at the same time a backup non-emergency ordinance is enacted that requires the same payments. So what we have in the packet before the Ordinance Committee is a non-emergency ordinance that applies only to stores that have not paid under the emergency ordinance. If an entity wishes to challenge the validity of the emergency findings, they may do so. And if they are successful, they would be obligated to pay under the non-emergency ordinance. So the purpose of the process we're advising is to discourage challenges to emergency findings. There is a vote differential. You see it on the screen. So the difference between emergency and non-emergency is important in this situation. And next slide, please. Happy to take questions or to return to the comparison city slide as you please, Chair Jordan.
I suspect we should just roll back a couple to that slide and just have it up there. If we could do that, perfect. And then questions from the Ordinance Committee. Mr. Gutierrez, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. Mr. Colon, would you mind just reiterating again what would happen if this item does not move past the Ordinance Committee?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Chair Jordan, Committee Member Gutierrez. The emergency ordinance will be on the council's agenda this afternoon. What the municipal code does not speak to is whether a majority of the council, 4 of you, could decide instead of introducing and adopting the emergency ordinance this afternoon, could you take that and convert it into a non-emergency ordinance and introduce it with 4 votes, notwithstanding the Ordinance Committee's rejection of the very same idea 2 hours earlier? The code is silent on that. As a matter of parliamentary procedure, I am going to defer to the council to work that out. I believe it's unusual to read the municipal code to preclude a majority of the council from acting. However, if this committee rejects the regular ordinance, we have that issue in front of us to address as a matter of parliamentary procedure.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Chair Jordan. Thank you, Mr. Kalan. I have a couple questions. First, if we just go with non-emergency, what would be the justification? So is that the police power and the labor code section? And then what justification do we have for singling a certain class of worker?
Thank you. That's an important question. As I mentioned, it takes a rational basis to distinguish between classes of workers. To my surprise, the trial court in Long Beach found a couple of things that are worth repeating. First, in terms of singling out large national chains, to my surprise, given what I said on the 20th, the court found that the large profits of larger companies justified singling out their workers for special treatment. And then second, and so the legal standard is simply a rational basis. Is there any conceivable set of facts under which your distinction between different kinds of workers makes sense? And here the Long Beach court said distinguishing large store workers makes sense. Now, as to the risk of injury, there were disputed facts in the Long Beach case. The grocery workers presented evidence that they were at a substantially higher risk of mortality than other populations. The California Grocers Association likewise presented evidence, and even the Grocers Association evidence showed that there was a, quote, slightly elevated risk of mortality for grocery workers. And upon that basis, the court found that the limiting the ordinance to those grocery workers was rational.
Okay. And then, so on that rational basis, and this is just, it's just anytime we're singling out a certain group, I want to understand. So I could understand it from the emergency if we were in emergency, and if we're going the non-emergency route, which actually makes more sense to me, I'll just say, then does it open it up to, and I'm not opposed to this, but would it open it up to something like, say, the cannabis industry that's had gross profit during this time, and the farm workers are not fairly compensated and they also have a higher risk, that type of thing? Like if we're just, are there other industries where there's gross profit and workers are at risk who haven't been compensated?
The answer is perhaps, but that fact alone could never compel the city council to take action.
Okay.
Because you would have a rational reason for excluding those other industries.
And what would it be? I think that's what I mean, if I can see a rational reason for supporting this, but then what does the rational reason become for not then pursuing other industries that might have the same?
It's hard to know without looking at the particular industry. So let's imagine we have an industry that has made outsized profits while exposing its workers. to greater COVID risk. They would have a political argument to be included, but they would not have a legal argument to demand inclusion.
Thank you. That's my question about. I'm just trying to look at where there might be legal inconsistencies that would be exposed to legally at the political part, not just the legal part. And then for something like Tri-Counties produce, for instance, are they excluded or included in the ordinance as proposed today?
In the ordinance as proposed today, unless Tri-Counties has 300 employees nationally, they would be excluded.
Okay, so no local business would be, solely local business would be under this umbrella.
That's correct. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out in the table that's on the screen is you will see that cities like American Canyon and Berkeley have a national size, but a local size of 1. That means that, let's say, for example, Ralph's is a chain with 300 nationally. If they were in Berkeley, they would need only 1 local employee to be subject to the ordinance. So our ordinance has a second measuring block, and that is the number of employees actually employed in Santa Barbara. So 300 plus 20 locally is the way our ordinance would work, unless you choose to change that 20 number.
So that's at our discretion. We could make that 20 number lower to apply to more local workers.
It is in your discretion, and moreover, it was not discussed by the city council on the 20th of April.
Okay, so I'd be up for a discussion of bringing that number down. I mean, if we're going to do it for the rationale that there were gross profits nationally and locally, our own local workers and people were disproportionately impacted, then I don't see why that should be limited to 20. It should be whatever the number is working locally. And then you mentioned retail pharmacies. It doesn't matter local or national. Do we have locally owned retail pharmacies? And what's the rationale for including or exempting that group?
I think the rationale for including all pharmacies was simply the level of exposure for the workers. But to my surprise, none of the cities had size limits on retail pharmacies. I don't frankly know whether we have any remaining local pharmacists who do compounding or that kind of specialized work.
We do have local pharmacists who do compounding and that type of work, but I'm not sure if where the pharmacies that they're in are locally owned or not. I mean, I know we have local pharmacies that do pharmacists.
Under this proposal, all retail pharmacies would be included, regardless of size or the number of employees.
So then I would hope, like if we pass this today, that maybe if there's some local pharmacies that we're not aware of, that they might contact us and we might be able to adjust that. Well, it's still today, so it's not coming back later to council. Oh, if this is for the regular one and we talk about it in ordinance, it's okay then to have it the same day introduced? Or is that just for an emergency ordinance? Okay.
No, it would not become effective until given a second reading and the passage of 31 days.
And then what kind of implication could this have for in any emergency? Like if we're doing the non-emergency ordinance here, what future applicability would that have for, say, living wage or down the road, or a disaster only, this type of thing? What does this set us up for without thought to whether it's pro or con, but just what does this open us up to in the future for what we could do or how we might apply this?
The council has had for a number of years and has expressed the power it's had for a number of years in our living wage ordinance for city contractors. This ordinance is an expression of the same power. In the future, the council could create a minimum wage for many classes of workers, depending what it chose to do.
And in that case, too, we would have to have a rationale for that, but the rationale would be a living wage. Okay.
Yes, and to understand rational basis a little bit better, it's meant to be a low enough threshold that the courts can say, there are facts here. It's not our place to judge whether what the council did was wise. So we'll let the voters deal with that. So rational basis is the most hands-off standard of review that the courts give to you in your legislative capacity. Separation of powers based.
Okay. So it'd be the voters to decide whether we made a good call here or not. I understand. Okay, but legally
Precisely.
we're good. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks. Mr. Klein, I just have several also, but on kind of a different area. Do we have any idea of a list of local businesses that this would apply to that meet the criteria of outsized profits, 10,000 square feet, the 300, the 20, that kind of thing?
I do not.
And then you mentioned in the review of the Long Beach action that the court didn't take that preliminary action to just stop the case because it found the line was large pandemic profits by large grocery chains. What are those and how many of those do we have here?
I think that, well, I don't know what those are. I do know that Long Beach used the same 300 employee national size threshold as we're recommending.
And from a legal standpoint, when that was being reviewed by the court, is again the only evidence that there were large pandemic profits by large grocery chains, just these national reports in Bloomberg or something like that?
At a motion for preliminary injunction, the parties here, the grocers and the city, would have traded declarations from various experts.
And where does that evidence appear in our process?
We don't have direct evidence of the profitability of the stores that might be regulated, but we do have the information developed in the Long Beach record.
And just to be clear, we don't need to make a decision on strict evidence. We just have the ability to make the decision based on the legislation and the directives in your prior slides, right?
Yes, and if you're concerned that outsized profits might not be an appropriate basis for distinguishing big stores, there could be other reasons to distinguish big stores. Okay,
and then these are some points that just make me uncomfortable. So in the ordinance, on the emergency ordinance on the bottom of page 2, I think these are, you're setting up your alphabet list of findings, but the one that's I at the bottom. So you reference, not Bloomberg, Brookings Institute, you reference top retail companies, and you reference 16.7 billion profit above 2019 and 2020. But we don't have any information on whether those top retail companies exist in this town. And And we don't have any information on what the gain in percentage that 16.7 billion was 1 year over the next. Would both of those statements be true?
Yes, they would be. And in addition, the trial court in Long Beach noted that those outsized profits may have been true when Long Beach made its decision, but may no longer be true today.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Yep. So anybody else has any follow-ups, they can pop right up, or we will move on to public comment. Seeing nobody, I'll invite Ms. Perea back on to work through public comment for this item from members of the community in attendance.
Okay, and just a reminder to anybody who hasn't yet raised their hand, if you'd like to speak, go ahead and click on the hand icon and I will call on you in order. So far, Chair Jordan, we have 4 people who'd like to speak. I'm going to go ahead and call on Nadia Abashanab. Nadia, go ahead and unmute yourself and you're welcome to speak.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Nadia Abushnab. I am a resident of the city of Santa Barbara in the 3rd District, and I'm with the Santa Barbara County Action Network, a local nonprofit that supports social and economic justice, among other issues in the county. I'd like to thank you all for your thorough discussion today and last week, and for understanding the urgency of supporting essential workers in Santa Barbara, and for moving this ordinance forward in a timely manner. SBCAN supports a $5 per hour wage increase for grocery and drug retail workers for at least 60 days. And I agree with Council Member Sneddon's point that the local size should be lowered below 20 because the rationale for the ordinance is that the companies had outsized profits, so it doesn't make a difference whether or not how many local employees they have. We would be very proud to see Santa Barbara join 30 other cities and counties across California in supporting and honoring the workers that have done so much for our community. These workers did not sign up to be on the front lines of a global pandemic, but they have bravely stepped up to the challenge and have consistently kept our community fed and healthy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Okay. The next speaker is Wendy Santa Maria. Wendy Santa Maria, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself. And it looks like she called in with her phone, so it may take her a minute to input her PIN. I'm going to go ahead and call on the next person. That's Ian Bakke. Ian Bakke, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Pereira. Good afternoon, Chairman Jordan, Mayor Pro Tem Gutierrez, and Council Members Sutton. My name is Ian Bakke, and I'm calling with Santa Barbara Young Dems and the Santa Barbara Sunrise Movement, alongside a coalition of other grassroots labor and progressive community groups, to thank you for moving forward with this much-needed hero pay ordinance, and to strongly urge you to pass it unanimously here in the Ordinance Committee and at the full council meeting later today. Demonstrated our city's commitment to meeting our words with action. Throughout the pandemic, government has lauded our workers as heroes for putting themselves at risk of exposure to COVID-19. But the extra work, stress, and hazard essential workers had no choice but to endure has all too often not been by their mostly large public companies whose shareholders have reached tremendous financial gain burden that they cannot meet. In reality, the grocery industry has seen record profits. During average, they've only raised the wages of their workers. We all know that CVS, Vaughn, pay their workers here an extra $5 for 60 days. The city of Santa Barbara should join dozens of other cities in California in adopting the zero pay ordinance. While it would have been great to have done this earlier, we have an obligation to move forward with today's opportunity to make things right and recognize an ongoing hazard posed by At the end of the day, it's better than nothing, and late is better than never. And we agree that while you should consider expanding the ordinance to work in other businesses, that shouldn't be a alternative to passing this one today. Go 20 days to 60 days, I think it creates unnecessary financial uncertainty for our center. We're all going to be back here 60 days from now. The risk is not going to be over, and there's still going to be good reason to be alongside the other cities.
Thanks, Mr. Bakke. Your
Thank you so
time's
much
up.
for listening. And
You're
please
welcome.
pass.
Ian, we lost about half of what you said probably. If you want to shoot us all an email before we get to council with some of those comments, you were going in and out, and I imagine you'll be back at 2 o'clock also, but maybe get yourself in a better place so it doesn't go in and out. Next speaker, please, Ms. Perea.
Okay, next speaker is Wendy Santamaria. Wendy Santamaria, if you'd like to go ahead and speak.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Santamaria. I'm the community organizer with the Central Coast Alliance United for Sustainable Economy, or CAUSE, and a Santa Barbara resident. Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council, for your thorough discussion at this previous meeting and for bringing this urgent matter forward in such a timely manner. I'm here because on behalf of CAUSE and our base, I'm here to share our full support for the $5 an hour wage increase for grocery and drug retail workers for 60 days. We are proud to join over 30 other cities and counties across California in recognizing the heroism and courage of these essential workers who are quite literally on the front lines, keeping our communities fed, administering vaccines, and risking their health and their lives as a result. I think the best way to thank these essential workers for all they do is to have their compensation reflect the work they do and the risks they're under. So I'm here to ask for you to please support this $5 an hour wage increase for grocery and drug retail workers for 60 days for your many Santa Barbara constituents who would greatly benefit from this wage increase. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms. Perea.
Okay, next speaker is Rachel Torres. Rachel Torres, go ahead and unmute yourself. You're welcome to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Torres. I'm with the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 770. I will keep my comments very brief. We want to just thank this committee staff for all your hard work, your due diligence moving this forward, your comprehensive questions. As we know, this is a timely matter, so we thank you for bringing this forward, and we look forward to moving through this to City Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms. Perea.
Okay, and our final speaker is Anna Marie Gott. Ms. Gott, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself, you're welcome to speak.
The city does not have a living wage for our workers. By not having a living wage, this council essentially endorses poverty wages that many of the businesses in the city of Santa Barbara pay. It also endorses and facilitates generational poverty. It does not make any sense to single out any workers for increased hazard pay when more workers work in the city for poverty wages, and this microscopic subset of workers are typically associated with unions. Further, the public health department has stated that workers in restaurants, agriculture, assisted living facilities, and health facilities have contracted COVID at higher rates without compensation. Simply putting and prioritizing hazard pay on the agenda that benefits this subset of essential workers is just, in my opinion, crazy. You have council members and the mayor that are running for re-election. They are simply pandering to the unions that have actually voted to endorse them. If you're going to do anything, you need to actually pass a living wage ordinance for the entire workforce. It will not require a task force, study, a working group, or years to accomplish. It can and should be done quickly. That's the rational thing to do. And it would be permanent, And it would uplift all of your residents, not just a few that are working at Ralph's, as an example. Further, if you start this now at Santa Barbara, other municipalities would follow you. You would actually be the leader. So that's what I urge you to do. Vote no on this and instead pass a living wage in the next 90 days. You can do it. You should do it. And it would actually show you to be leaders rather than followers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Any other speakers, Ms. Perea?
No further speakers. That was the final speaker.
Okay, we will close public comment and bring it back to the committee for further questions or deliberation. Ms. Sneddon, thank you.
Okay, Jordan. Well, I think, and just, I'll start by saying that I wouldn't have brought this to council and to ordinance, and for many of the reasons I've been grappling with, singling out certain groups, and I am in favor of moving toward a living wage. I don't think that is something that could happen overnight, but then it would apply more across the city. I do, with how this has been presented, I've had more time to really look at the implications in other cities and how it's done. And I'm conceptually, I'm in favor. I think we have a little complication here with the two different approaches. And I don't mean it's a beneficial complication, I guess, a complexity with the two. So the non-emergency ordinance, I am actually more in favor of, because we are moving out of the emergency time. And I think, I just want to be clear though, and I'm in favor of this, but I want to be clear that this does open the way for living wage, which I think is a good idea, and for having other justifications and rationales for raising our minimum wage for our local workers. I'm not really comfortable with the separating out which industries of gross profit. I think if it's gross profit and the workers who are local were put at risk in harm's way without signing up to have been a first responder or to risk their lives, then I think we should think about how that applies to other industries as well. So I'm willing to go here, but for me, logically, this means we have to go farther in other areas as well. If we're doing this, then I think we need to look at a living wage, and not immediately. That's something that would take, I do think it would take research in which businesses it affects and how it would affect our hospitality and a longer term view. It might take a year to come up with that kind of analysis. Which is something I'll mention at council as well. It's not really for us here, but I'm just stepping through my reasoning for this. What we're considering today is just the non-emergency ordinance. And, that makes more sense to me than the urgency. And if we go the non-emergency, then I think we really are opening up, looking at other industries. And again, the cannabis industry comes to mind. I mean, farm workers were very hard hit and not protected, and mortality rates are higher. And that is an industry that had huge profit in this cycle. So I want to be sort of consistent with the thinking on that. So I'm going to vote to move this forward, and it's also going to come with a consideration of where else it applies, and that will also be, if this does move on to other cities or the county, I will also be asking that they really look at that as well, because it's fair, and I want to apply it either broadly. I'm very uncomfortable. I do agree that this is a group that deserves hazard pay, And there are so many others that do as well, and who didn't sign up to be on the front lines of COVID. And it'll have implications in the future. I mean, this isn't our last disaster or something that affects the health and safety of the whole community, that we have certain groups of workers that are putting themselves in harm's way without having signed up to be first responders. I think that's a pretty key thing. They didn't sign up to be hazard workers. I would like the local number to go down. I mean, I think if it's 300 nationally and whatever that smaller number that we have the will to do to go down, then I'm good with that. I think it makes sense. I don't see why at 20 you don't apply to local workers, but at fewer than that you do. If it's about our local workers, it's about our local workers. So 1 is fine with me if we go there. So those are my thoughts at this point. And that's where I'll leave it for deliberation.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Thank you, Chair Jordan. Thank you, Councilmember Sneddon. I agree with a lot of what you said, and I will also be voting for this to move forward to the council. I also want to thank the callers for what they have to say. I agreed with a lot of it. I know that, and I agree that we should pass a living wage city and countywide that reflects the needs of what it takes to live in this community. But we decided just to take this small step first, and I feel that it's appropriate and obtainable, and I just, you know, it's been a tough time in this community for the last year, and for those people working in our grocery stores, it's been really difficult even before the pandemic happened to just live here. And we just felt that they needed to see that we cared, and that doesn't mean that we don't care about everyone else. Obviously we do, but we had to just take one step first before taking the giant leap. So I will be voting for this to move forward, and I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding and in watching us kind of flesh this out. I also agree with Ms. Sneddon in lowering it even less than 20 employees as well. I'd like to discuss that to see how the rest of the council would feel about what would be appropriate for that. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I will let one of you make a motion when you're ready. I'm very uncomfortable recommending it to council. I'm looking forward to much more conversation there to see if I can lose my level of uncomfortability, but I've had a week to think about this, and I am uncomfortable that the intent that we say we are pursuing is what will actually happen, and that the broadness, even as it is right now, without playing with numbers or increasing the scope of who would qualify, that the broadness there already will bring more than the intent that's been stated, which are companies that have made outsized profits during the pandemic. Clearly, to me, most of this effort is directed at 1 or 2 players in the grocery industry, but for example, nobody here today can even provide a list of who would qualify and be subject to the requirements of this ordinance that passed in the city. Whether that would be somebody like Tri-County or not, I don't think we know today. So I won't be supporting its recommendation, but I'm looking forward to discussing this further at the full council later today. So if one of the two of you would toss up a motion to keep this moving forward, that would be appreciated.
I'll make the motion to approve staff recommendation.
Very good. Can't hear
I
you.
have a-
Just-
Sorry. Yeah, I have a question procedurally. So if this were not to move forward, then what would be considered at council would still be the urgency ordinance, but it would require 5 votes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if this moves forward, then council will have the consideration of both. Or
That is correct.
one or the other. Okay. Well, I'm in favor of this one and not in favor of the urgency one. So I will second the motion for this one. And then when we get to council, it will be a different discussion of whether it's both or none or how it goes from there.
Very good. Thank you. Any other discussion from either of you? Seeing none, Ms. Perea, I will ask you to call a roll call for the motion, please. I think we all understand it. We can just go right to roll call.
Okay, yeah, the motion is just to approve staff recommendation. It was made by Mayor Pro Tem Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Sneddon. Councilmember Sneddon.
One second.
Yes.
Did we, in the motion, Councilmember Gutierrez, lower the number of local workers from 20?
No, I didn't throw out a specific number.
Did you want to, or leave it at 20 and it goes to council? I don't know.
We can leave it at 20 and then have it discussed during the council meeting.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's take the vote, please. Councilmember Sneddon.
Sorry, that was my yes.
Okay, and Mayor Pro Tem Gutierrez
Aye.
and Chair Jordan.
No. And so that recommendation will move to council as passing here with a majority vote of 2-1. And we have no further business, but if Ms. Gott is still available, I promised we would come back to her for public comment and not on the agenda when we couldn't hook her up. If you could see if you could make that work.
Yes, she is available and she's standing by. Ms. Gott, if you'd like to go ahead and speak.
Council members, someone said a living wage would take about a year in a study. That isn't true. Numerous California cities have looked at livable wages. Economists, have also looked at increasing minimum wage to livable wages. The economic literature around the issue actually points to the fact that increasing wages does not put businesses out of business, because increasing wages across the board, and not just for a subset of workers, actually spurs economic growth. I want to remind you a few things about poverty, about wages, and the adopted phase 2 policy on homelessness that you passed last week. 1 in 4 children in the county live in poverty. Brain development is delayed by poor nutrition and neglect. Children born into poverty are more likely to have their own children born into poverty. That's generational poverty. And this council, by not passing a living wage, actually supports generational poverty. Children born into poverty are more likely to actually drop out of school. Living wage jobs are out of reach for anyone that doesn't have a diploma. And the 2019 National Academy of Sciences estimated that child poverty costs the economy of the United States between $800 billion and $1.1 trillion a year. They also state the following: poor children develop weaker language skills, memory, and self-regulation skills compared to their peers. When they grow up, they have lower earnings and income, are more dependent on public assistance, and have more healthcare problems, and are more likely to commit crimes. Robust research evidence also shows that low income itself, rather than other conditions poor children face, is responsible for much of these negative impacts in
Could you wrap
children's
up, please, Ms.
development.
Scott?
Yep, 2 more points. The
Okay.
National Low Income Housing Coalition estimated that an individual would need to work 90 hours a week in order to rent an apartment at fair market value in the county. And finally, the disparity between minimum wage and the current cost of living is so large that there is not a single U.S. state in which a minimum wage worker can afford to rent a 2-bedroom home. The result is an economy that doesn't work for everyone. And you should be working for an economy that actually works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. We will then adjourn and be back to full council meeting at 2 o'clock. Thank you all.